What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another tier list video. We are going to be ranking the biggest pay-per-view draws in the UFC, or at least the biggest stars in the UFC, because some of these guys haven't been able to headline a pay-per-view yet, but we're going to be ranking them from S tier to D tier. S tier obviously being the biggest stars in the sport, or the biggest stars in the UFC in general, and D tier being almost pay-per-view poison, or at least just not there yet. Well, I think there are some potential with some of these D tier candidates, but I'm just going to get right into the video. So starting with D tier, because there's only a few people in there, so I might as well just get started with it just to get through it in general. So D tier, we have starting out here is Brandon. Oh, that's Corey Sandhagen. We have Brandon Moreno, the flyweight champ in the UFC. I'm putting him at D tier. I don't see much drawing power out of him yet. Maybe, I think it's just the lack of big matchups there. Maybe if he gets a few bigger matchups, doesn't have the title flip-flopping. He is a kind of the bigger star at the flyweight division at the moment, but I don't know if that's really saying too much in general. So I'm going to go with Brandon Moreno. He isn't the worst person in this list, or not in this list, but in this ranking in general, but that's where I kind of have him. Maybe he gets a few bigger wins over some bigger names. We can move him up to C tier, but I have him at D tier at this point. Next up, we have the light heavyweight champ, Jamal Hill, and I'm putting him at D tier now. For Jamal Hill, I think he has a lot of potential to move up this ranking quite a bit. He has a good personality, very entertaining fights, but I think a lot of people think he doesn't really deserve, or at least isn't as much of a champion as a champion should be. Like, they see him beating Glover, but to be fair, he was coming off a weird win over Thiago Santos. That wasn't extremely impressive, but then it ended up destroying Glover Teixeira in their fight. So I think with the personality and the fighting style of Jamal Hill, I think he'll gain more and more fans, but I think that has to happen over time. I think the first matchup is either like a Yuri or an Alex Pereira. If he ends up beating both of them, I can see him climbing up there. He, again, very good personality, and I think he can attract a lot of viewers in general just with his fighting style as well. So I'm going to put Jamal Hill at D tier right after Brandon Moreno on here. He does have a lot of potential though to move up, so not necessarily a bad thing yet. But next up, we have the bantamweight champ, Aljamain Sterling. I'm putting him at D tier. Honestly, I don't know. He does have some fans, but let's be real. Like, maybe at this point we move Sterling ahead of Jamal Hill, but I think Jamal Hill is getting a little bit more traction. Sterling's never going to get love from the fans in general, so we're just going to put him there. And I don't think he's getting too well in pay-per-view buys. First pay-per-view he headlined, I think he said is 250K. Cejudo's manager said like 700K or 800K, when realistically he said the people that were telling him what the buy rate was, and he's the one getting pay-per-view points, said it'd be lucky if it got to 250K. So that's not good for Aljamain Sterling, not good for Henry Cejudo either. I'm going to discuss that a little bit later as well, but not good for Aljamain Sterling. I think Jamal Hill did better than that. Maybe Glover Teixeira did a lot of work there, but I think 300K pay-per-view buys, 250K. Jamal Hill, I think, is allowed to go a little bit forward. Obviously, Sterling has some really good wins, but I just think, in general, he doesn't really draw too much. And then last on this D tier list, Belal Muhammad. Maybe internationally, he can get some eyes on the sport, but I think a lot of people find him very boring and then really annoying as well. And I think they're just put off by him in general, and they don't want him to get a title shot. And I think the UFC knows that, so they're going to be putting that off for quite a bit for Belal Muhammad. We'll see what happens there, but not looking too good for Belal Muhammad. I don't think people like him or enjoy anything he does in general. So I'm putting him at the end of D tier. I don't know if he's that big of a draw, let's be real. But moving on to C tier, we have, we have Leon Edwards coming in at the top of C tier. Now, I was going to put this next person above him, but I was kind of just looking at some of the interactions he does have on Instagram, and they're kind of growing quite a bit. He does have some iffy interactions in general, but he has those 2 wins over Kamaru Usman. Maybe before the Usman fight, you could probably put him at D tier, because I don't think a lot of people were as interested in his personality, and his fights were kind of a little bit decision-y, and he's playing it a little bit more safer. But I think those 2 fights against Kamaru Usman, he looked really good, and I think his star power is starting to grow. So that's why I'm going to put him in front of this next guy, Paddy Pimlet. I was going to put Paddy Pimlet above Leon Edwards, but I think Leon Edwards is a more consistent name. I guess Paddy Pimlet just got injured, lost to Jared Gordon by robbery, and I think that soured a lot of people's taste for Paddy Pimblett, as weird as that sounds. Paddy Pimblett has more volatile, just looking at his Instagram, more volatile. I think he had like a wedding photo that got 750k likes, has more followers than Leon Edwards, but a lot of his posts are like 10k from like his podcast. So and some of the posts from Leon Edwards are getting a little bit more consistent, 50k and up likes in general. So I'm gonna go with Leon Edwards for now. I think Paddy Pimblett, just in general, putting off quite a bit of people, especially after his last fight. So I'm gonna put him right below Leon Edwards. If he gets a win over Jared Gordon again, maybe you can kind of restart that a little bit more, but it's not looking very good for Paddy Pimblett right now. Next up, we have Tony Ferguson. This one's kind of rough in general because I think it all started from that Chandler loss, or at least just the losing spree in general. But I think he still had quite a bit of followers from the Chandler fight, before the Chandler fight. But then he got KO'd, and he didn't look good against Diaz. But I still think he has quite a bit of followers. But I think, especially as a name, I think quite a few people buy the pay-per-view because of him. Maybe in that case, you could probably move him towards the top of this list. But I think in general, I think he's going to be on the prelims of this next card that he's fighting on. Was it 291? I want to say. I might be wrong on that, against Bobby Green. That might be 290 or 291. And I don't know, man. I don't know where to gauge Ferguson at this point. I think the other guys have a more consistent interaction-based style on their Instagrams in general. Even though Tony posts some weird stuff, he has a pretty strong following in general that probably do buy the pay-per-views because of him. I think this is probably a good spot at this point. I don't know where to put Ferguson, because he did have a weird match after the Nate Diaz fight, and I don't know where people are at. That's where I'm going to put him for now. For the next one, I'm going to put Derek Lewis. And now thinking about it, I think I am missing one person on this list. But I'm going to go with Derek Lewis for right after Ferguson on here. I think Derek Lewis has taken quite a bit of losses. He lost to Sergey Pavlovich. A lot of people were behind him. And then he lost to, who was it, Sergey Spivak recently. And I don't really know where he's at. He's fighting Marco Rogerio de Lima. So I guess we can kind of see where he's at that point. If he gets a win, maybe fans will be more on him. He'll go back on the main card, because I think he's on the prelims as well right now. But we'll see right now for Derek Lewis. I think he still has some drawing power. He's still an entertaining guy. People tune into his press conferences. I'm going to put him right after Tony Ferguson here. Right after that, we have Tai Tuivasa. Another surging name here. Did beat Derek Lewis. Was a really big fight. Kind of hyped up their names quite a bit in general. Put down Derek Lewis's name a little bit more. And then Tai Tuivasa fought Cyril Gane. Kind of got beat up pretty badly, knocked down Cyril Gane at one point, and had a pretty fun fight there. So his name kind of went up there as well. And then got KO'd by Sergey Pavlovich. And then I don't know where his name's at right now. It's been a while since he's fought. I think it's been like 6 months. Haven't really heard much from him in general. I do think Derek Lewis at this point is still a little bit of a bigger star and name value than Tai Tuivasa, but I think it's kind of even at this point. If Derek Lewis just keeps losing, maybe I'll bring him down a little bit more, but I think this is probably the right spot. Maybe they're a little bit even on this part of the tier list. Next up, and I think this is the final person I have on this part of the list, I have Corey Sandhagen. Really good fighter, really talented fighter, very entertaining fighter, but he hasn't gotten, so he got the KO over Edgar, and then he had like a Marlon Moraes KO. Got submitted by Sterling, and I think his last few fights have been by decision in general. They've been pretty solid performances against Petr Yan, TJ Dillashaw, Song Yadong. Pretty good performances in general, but I don't know if I see the drawing power here. He doesn't really have too big of a personality. His fighting style is pretty cool to watch, but he just hasn't been getting KOs recently. He headlines the fight night main events, and a lot of these guys do that as well, but I just don't see the drawing power or the pay-per-view star in general out of Corey Sandhagen. He does headline the fight nights, and you can put him on a fight night main event in front of a crowd, and it sells quite a bit of tickets, but I don't know, like maybe if he gets a title, or I think actually if he beats Umar Nurmagomedov, I think he moves up quite a bit on this list. So I think if he gets that win, he moves up quite a bit, but I just don't know if I see the drawing power out of Corey Sandhagen. Maybe in that case, especially for like fight nights, maybe you put Corey Sandhagen up a little bit more here. Maybe you put him ahead of Derek Lewis. I think at this point, he's probably that big of a draw there. So I think that's a little bit more comfortable of a list. All right, and that's going to finish off C tier here, I think. Well, actually, I think I forgot to add one person to this list. Let me put in Kevin Holland. I don't know where I would put him. I think I put him because he had a big fight against Wonderboy in the main event there. Had a good win over Ponzinibbio. Didn't get the KO till late. Maybe you put him right here. If not, maybe ahead of Sandhagen. But I think this is probably the right spot for Kevin Holland. I think. I'm not sure. I think that's probably the right spot for Kevin Holland. But let's move on to this list. Let's go to the B tier. Starting out, we have Kamaru Usman topping off the B tier here. At the start of the B tier, higher part of the B tier for sure. He just lost his belt. I think the belt was a pretty big thing for him. I think a lot of his matchups kind of relied on other stars like the Masvidal, Colby in general. I think he kind of relied more on other bigger stars. And let's be real, I don't think his personality is likable in general. I think a lot of people get tuned out by him. I think in general his fighting style, just his KO power, got a lot of attention from fans, which the KO over Masvidal was pretty big and did make him a big star. But outside of having the championship, where does that put Kamaru Usman at this point? I'm assuming he does have some good drawing power, but that's why I'm putting it at the top of B tier. I don't see him at A tier yet, especially with some of these other guys. Maybe he's a little bit farther down, B tier in general, but that's where I'm going to put him. I realize I'm covering the top part of this list here. That might be a little bit better, but that's what I got there. And it's only tied to Ivasa there, but for the next person on this list, I have Dustin Poirier. Good drawing power in general. I think the 2 Conor McGregor fights actually helped him quite a bit, and I'm basically just going off of that, right under Kamaru Usman there. A bigger name in the sport for sure. He's about to headline with Justin Gaethje, and Justin Gaethje's not my next person. It is Max Holloway. Pretty big name, has a really big following as well. I do think it's right under Poirier because of the 2 Conor McGregor fights. I believe Dustin Poirier does have a bigger name at this point, but I am going to go with Max Holloway right under Dustin Poirier here. Had a three really big fights with Volkanovski. Continues to be pretty entertaining. Continues to be good on the mic. So I think he belongs there. Does draw some really good viewers as well. Next up on the list, we have Michael Chandler. Very good on the mic, and I do think if he would have gotten the Conor fight, maybe that fight still happens. He does move up quite a bit on this list. Maybe moves up to A tier if he ends up KOing Conor McGregor. But we'll see if that fight actually happens. But I think Michael Chandler, very good on the mic. Very entertaining fighting style. Is quickly gaining quite a bit of fans, and I think he has a lot of eyes on him right now. We'll see if he gets the Conor fight. That would be really big for him, and you can tell he really wants it. But we'll see what happens. But I think Michael Chandler deserves to kind of be under Max Holloway at this point. Next up on the list, we'll see if this surprises anybody. I have Sean O'Malley here. I think the win over Petr Yan, people are calling it a robbery. I actually, live watching, I thought Sean O'Malley won the fight, and I still think you can still give him the fight. I'm pretty sure it was a pretty close fight. What was it? I think it was the second round. You could give the Sean O'Malley. I think it was the knee. It was either the second or third round. I can't remember off the top of my head, where he landed a big knee and landed a really big cut on Petr Yan's face. And then the first round was pretty close. I think that one could have gone either way. You can base it kind of on damage. I think it's even on the feet, but you kind of have to base it off aggressiveness if you're going by the scoring criteria. That's why I think it's really close. I don't even think it's a robbery to give it to Sean O'Malley. It's a very close fight in general. So that's what I have him there. If he gets the belt, I think he becomes a really big star. If you see some of the interactions he has on his Instagram page, it'll kind of show that a little bit more there. But I'm going to hold Sean O'Malley right under Michael Chandler. I think he has humongous star power in general that he could have. He just needs to get a little bit better on the mic, start trash talking a little bit more. He does kind of have the humor of a Masvidal, but he's not as good on the press conference things. He kind of just closes off a little bit more, doesn't really have lines. Maybe he's nervous up there, but he does have some good humor in his little videos that he does in general. So he does kind of have a Masvidal sarcastic humor that's pretty funny in general, but he doesn't really do it on the stage to promote fights too much. And I kind of want to see that more out of him, especially out of a bigger fight against Sterling for the title. We'll see what he does there in general. Next up, we have Alexander Volkanovski. I think the last fight against Makhachev has done really well for Volkanovski. I actually had him lower on this list before rethinking some of these parts, but I'm going to put Volkanovski a little higher. I think if he does end up beating Yair and then going up and beating Islam and like another contender up there, I think he becomes a really big star in general. Not just after that, but maybe if he beats Islam, you become instantly a big star just because of how the UFC kind of regards the Dagestani fighters in general and Islam Makhachev as like the guy under Khabib. So he'll instantly get a lot of star power in general. So that'll be really big for him. But I'm going to put him at B tier right under Sean O'Malley. Not really a bad spot to be put at in general. And next up we have Justin Gaethje. I have him right under Volkanovski. I don't see him headlining. When he does headline, he doesn't sell too many pay-per-views. And I'm not sure his interactions are pretty crazy either. He's a very entertaining fighter, but just based on personality-wise, he doesn't really get up there in general. Volkanovski, probably one of the greatest, if not, you can arguably the greatest featherweight of all time. You can kind of get that star power with that with the championship. With Justin Gaethje, his very entertaining fights, but the personality is not there. So the interactions aren't going to be crazy there, but a lot of people will buy the cards that he is on because of entertaining fighting style. So that's why I'm going to put Justin Gaethje right under Volkanovski there. And then next up there, we have Henry Cejudo. Now, I am kind of debating this. Let me actually move. I don't know if... Why don't we go down there? I'm going to go Henry Cejudo right under Justin Gaethje. Seeing his last fight sold, 250K pay-per-view buys, that is not good. Especially returning from a big layoff after being, Triple C, double champ in bantamweight and flyweight. Man, that's not a good look for Henry Cejudo. I don't know where his drawing power is at personality-wise. I do think he draws some viewers, but I don't know. Maybe guys just streamed the fight in general and didn't buy it, but that doesn't look good for Henry Cejudo. If it drops down a little bit more, maybe I'll put him a little bit more lower than in like C tier, because a lot of those guys can get above Henry Cejudo at this point. But I'm putting Henry Cejudo at like a little safety net there. We'll see what he does next, but I wasn't too crazy about his last pay-per-view sales in general. So moving up to the big boys in A tier. Starting this off, this one could get a little debatable. Maybe not. Maybe these ones will be a little bit more debatable in general. But starting off, we have Israel Adesanya. And now, if you asked me about a year ago, probably, maybe a little bit less than a year ago, I would have said Israel Adesanya is probably on the bottom end of this A tier list. Because let's be real, I think his highest selling fight was the Jan Blachowicz fight. I think it went Costa 700K in my brain, Jan Blachowicz 800K, and I think Vettori did 600K, if I'm wrong. And then I think Whitaker did like 500K, 550, and then Cannonier did like 350K, 400K, and that was not looking good. There's a lot of things around Israel Adesanya saying like he didn't have entertaining fights, boring fights, which part of that is kind of true with Israel Adesanya, especially that Cannonier fight. A lot of the people going in there like Israel Adesanya has boring fights. People were standing up for him, and then after that, people walking out of the stadium during this fight when it was kind of decently close. That was not a good look for Israel Adesanya, and this may be a hot take, but I think Alex Pereira kind of revitalized his career as a pay-per-view star in general. Because without Alex Pereira, I think his buy rates just continue to go lower, because that was the trend before Alex Pereira came back. I don't know what the pay-per-view buy rate was for it. I think it was 600K for Alex Pereira versus Izzy 1, where Alex Pereira won. And I don't know, they haven't released the buy rate for this last one, but they stacked that card. So my guess is probably definitely above 600K. So we'll see how that one goes. But I think Alex Pereira did really good, at least for Israel Adesanya pay-per-view star buy rate in general. We'll see how he does now. He does get a lot of interactions on Instagram, especially right now. So we'll see what happens there. But it's kind of hard to gauge, especially at A tier where some of these guys are at. But that's how I'm going to put it. Next up, a guy that could easily be the top of this list. We have Charles do Bronx Oliveira. Man, I was really debating putting him above Israel Adesanya here because I don't know. I was looking at their interactions on their Instagram. And that's kind of how you got to base it off. Just interactions in general, how many people are liking the post. because you can really see how big it is. Like, a lot of people, especially following some of the guys you won't like, especially a guy that I'll talk about a little bit later here, but guys you won't like, you won't follow, but you will interact on their posts, and you can see some of the views they get in general. But Charles Oliveira, every town he goes to, like, the crowd is always behind him, especially in Canada. That really showed it for a lot of people, and he does get insane interactions on his posts, especially right now. I didn't know how to necessarily compare these against like a Charles Oliveira and an Israel Adesanya, because Charles Oliveira is coming out right after his fight recently, and he was getting pretty big interactions, but Israel Adesanya is also getting really big interactions. So I think both of these guys are kind of interchangeable for these top spots, but I think Israel Adesanya really revitalized his pay-per-view star power right now. So we'll see how this is in maybe a few months, after a few fights, or at least by the end of the year. You'll kind of get an idea, because maybe Charles Oliveira fights Makhachev and wins. Maybe he fights Conor McGregor and wins. We'll see what happens. A lot of things can happen here, but Charles Oliveira is definitely working his way up to A tier, or maybe even S tier at this point. A lot of people are behind him right now. Big star in that lightweight division. Next up, Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat Chimaev has been out for a while. Looking interaction-wise, looking crowd-wise, pay-per-views, I guess you can't really say for Khamzat Chimaev, but just in general, really big star potentially. Gets a lot of interactions on his posts, over like 200K. Maybe it's a lot of international stuff because he is from like a smaller place, Chechnya in general. Russia's quite a bit behind him in general. Really big star, really big potential star. I think him being gone for such a long time, missing weight by 8 pounds, being gone and will likely not fight for like over a year here, I think is really hurting him in general. But a lot of eyes are still on him in general. So we'll see how he is when he comes back. But I think Khamzat Chimaev is in a relatively good spot here. And the last person on this list, Colby Covington. And I'm going to make my arguments here because I know a lot of people might argue whether or not he belongs on this list. At A tier, not on this list in general, but at A tier, the bottom of A tier. Colby Covington, when he came back, he was a pretty decently star. Like, he draws money. He's that heel guy. Colby Covington is a pretty big star in the UFC. Just the interactions he gets alone on his Instagram in general. He doesn't have a lot of followers because a lot of people don't like him, so they won't follow and they won't look at the stuff he does in general. But when he came back, at that UFC press conference, at the weigh-in, you could see just by view-wise on the YouTube. I haven't seen on MacLife. I checked the MacLife when it actually happened. They took down the videos. But Colby Covington's weigh-in, when no one knew he was going to be there and he came out of nowhere, was like multiple 100K views. Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards got like 20K. Press conference, Kamaru Usman, Leon Edwards, like I think maybe higher up, maybe a little bit lower than 100K. Colby Covington well over like 200K, 300K, 400K. People are not missing interviews. People are not missing press conferences, and people are not really missing Colby Covington in some of these videos. Not in a bad way, but obviously like they have to see these things. So he's a bigger draw, especially you saw that on the London card. Like, that's a perfect example of why he is above a guy like Kamaru Usman in general. So that's why I'm putting Colby Covington there. He's the fourth best guy in the A tier. Maybe if he wins the title and he fights a Conor McGregor or something, who knows at this point what the fuck Conor McGregor is doing. He's really pissing me off in general, but we'll see what happens. I think Colby Covington is a pretty big star. I think not a lot of people will admit it because they don't like him. So I'm putting Colby Covington there at the bottom of A tier. Moving on to the S tier, I think these are pretty obvious. Conor McGregor is the most obvious one, biggest star in the sport, but Jon Jones coming back, selling over 1 million pay-per-views on his first fight back against Cyril Gane, who had just went with Ngannou and only sold like 200K pay-per-views in general. Jon Jones definitely carried that card and sold a lot of pay-per-views, so shows a lot on Jon Jones, especially with the $100 basically price limit on these pay-per-views. That's really crazy in general. The ESPN Plus $100, like 50, 75, I think $75 in general, and then you have to pay for ESPN Plus, which is like 10 or 15 bucks, and plus taxes, it's really like $100. So that's a really good buy rate in general, especially at this point for the UFC. But this is my UFC tier list for pay-per-view stars. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. This could be a little interesting in the comments. I'm just going to say that because a lot of this is a little bit subjective. but I hope I made decent arguments for where some of these guys belong. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.